This is the farmhouse where I grew up, where my father grew up, where my grandfather grew up, where my great-grandfather grew up. The main house was built in 1860. We got electricity in 1943 with the Rural Electrification Act. And now what I am doing is I'm removing the majority of the 1960 updates and reverting the era back to somewhere between 1920 and 1950. I'm going to show you each room in the order that I did them years ago. While I am no more of a carpenter or a designer than any member of my family has ever been, I'm doing it to suit me and my tastes. So as we were pulling down the ceiling, you can see that all that was above the initial plywood ceiling was the floorboards from the second story. And like we showed you in chapter 1, this was the wiring. The wiring was drilled through in the middle of the beam. And to put up a ceiling that we wanted, we had to move the wiring up tight against the floorboards. And that is what you see here with the yellow 12-2 with ground Romex. And since we had everything down, we still had to fix the problem with the ceiling joists not being supported just like it was in the lab on the other side of the wall. So you can see that we're doing some scabbing on to make sure that the beams are not supported just by that little inlet 1x2. And in places we had to replace the 1x2 because it was cracked and broken from the weight of the stuff up above. Finally, with every wire pulled and repositioned or replaced, we started putting up 2 inches of rigid polyiso with the radiant aluminum barrier. With the insulation up and covering all the wiring, we started putting up the ceiling. Now this ceiling is pressed paper wainscoting. We got it in 8-foot lengths and then cut it so that it would fit in between the rafters, and it was held up by strips of wood. And we painted it Valspar OC94 windswept. As you can see here, it's a simple matter. Once the pieces are cut, you just slide them into position. Now the first row is the easiest. After that, all the other rows we wanted to match so that you could look sideways across the room and see all the grooves aligned. And that was the hard part. And as you can see, it looks pretty good. You'd never know that it was just the pressed paper wainscoting. And you can see the little strips of plank that we cut that hold up the ceiling. So the ceiling is literally floating. And we left the beams natural because we figured we couldn't improve on what nature had done over the last 100 years. And that is how we put up the ceiling in the mudroom.